Hello, I'd like to, in this video, respond to a number of the points that were made in the Google Doc, either on the comments or on the reactions, and then introduce a new topic. So this is sort of a list of important comments or comments that I wanted to have a chance to respond to. The first group of comments has to do with the workbook that we've been looking at and the ways it can be used. So one important question was, how do students transition from the middle column, the direct translation, to the third column, which is the general understanding of the sentence? This actually I find to be relatively easy, and the workbook really leads us to this, because once you translate word by word and then you identify the end of the phrase, then you're focused on a group of 5 or 6 words, and you're looking at the words and you're looking at the translations, and there's an inherent motivation to understand what it all means together. And therefore, I think that going from the literal translation of each word to the phrases is really a very natural transition within the workbook. I do find sometimes that students, even though it seems like more boring, attach themselves to the literal translations because it's very concrete and easy to do, and they have to be nudged to try to figure out what the sentences mean. In terms of the transition from the workbook to the actual Talmud, I find that, as I mentioned, to be very challenging. The more that they're dependent on the entire system of the workbook, the harder it is to transition to the regular Gemara. I do find it easy over the years, in other words, like in 11th grade versus 9th grade, but I do find it challenging, let's say within 9th grade, where the learning in my class is focused on the workbook. They're not motivated to move to the regular Gemara. What I do is that I give them the use of their traditional Gemara on the tests so that they have a motivation to become comfortable with it. But even with that, it's still a challenge. Another thing that we've tried is to make it into a unit. In other words, since they're not using the Gemara every day, to spend a structured unit with a worksheet, how to use the Gemara, how to use the Tzuras Hadaf, what everything means, the Ein Mishpat, the Rashi, the Tosfos, the different sources on the page, and make that into a unit so it's focused, but again, in a structured and organized way. In terms of finding the literal translations, I want to just share with you one resource that we created, which is a dictionary. This is like a spreadsheet dictionary, which is also printed and used as a book. It's about 25 pages long, and it includes every single word that appears in the workbook in alphabetical order. So there's no shoresh. So there's ahav, ahava. This is just the beginning, but omer, omra, omrim, omeret. In other words, every word exactly as it appears in the Gemara. And this was a big job to put this together, as you can imagine, but it was made possible by taking all the words in the charts and sort of copying it into a spreadsheet and then alphabetizing it, trying to translate the Aramaic into Hebrew, every word into English. And then we also identify what daf it appears on, so that the kids could realize that it's their word. So with this dictionary, a student can really independently look up every word and find the translation and fill in the workbook. It also gives an authoritative translation so that in case someone got the wrong translation in class, they have the official translation of the class. So it's an amazing resource. It was a good amount of time. I'll just share my confession that I've only done this once for brachot. We haven't done it for any other curriculum because, as I mentioned, it's a lot of work to put it together, and I'm not 100% sure that it was worth the effort, but I'm definitely happy that I have it, and it's a tremendous resource. It points to the importance, in my opinion, of really creating the best resources possible to support the students in their learning. Okay. In terms of aging out of the workbook, I think that was a question that sort of recurred, and I do think that students age out of it despite the fact that they love it. In our school, we use it in 9th and 10th grade. I think that in 10th grade, the kids start to become a little bit bored of writing every single word, but they do appreciate the overall structure, and therefore the workbook could be used, and just its use can be modified so that they don't have to fill in every single word. Once they get to 11th grade, most classes don't use a workbook like this. Some people do. I find that a lot of students, are really not into it at all. So we do transition out, and then in the 11th grade, the Talmud itself becomes the main text. So that addresses the issue of becoming used to the Gemara itself, hopefully equipped with enough skills to be able to make it work. The question of the importance of Tzuras Hadaf, just for the either emotional tie to the Tzuras Hadaf or the skill of using Tzuras Hadaf, I definitely feel like the Gemara Tzuras Hadaf is really important. There has to be a way of transitioning the student from the workbook style learning to the Tzuras Hadaf of the Gemara. When it comes to the Mefarshim, I'm really sort of torn. I started off my career really tied to the Tzuras Hadaf, and actually over the years that I've been teaching, the Tzuras Hadaf of the Mefarshim has changed a lot with new editions that have come out. So I'm a little bit less tied to the Tzuras Hadaf of even the Rif and Rabbeinu Yonah in the Oz Hadar looks different than it used to be. Certainly, things like the Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritva don't really have such a sacred Tzuras Hadaf. So personally, I'm a little bit less tied to that, but I can see different ways of thinking about that. When it comes to something like the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, I do think it's more important for the students to be familiar with just the way the page looks, and sometimes I'll give them copies of the page rather than just the text from Sefaria or Bar Ilan. I think that another point that's really interesting to think about, and I'm wondering what you think about this, especially those of you who have taught, is the use of Rashi in the Gemara class. When it comes to Rashi, so Rashi is obviously the most important commentary when it comes to trying to figure out the Gemara on your own. When it comes to teaching, when you're teaching the Gemara in a classroom, I find that I need to give them what Rashi says along with the translation. And once I do that, there's little sense in going to Rashi, and then they don't see what Rashi is adding. So I actually find that Rashi is a little bit confusing in a lower level class where I'm giving them the basic translation and explanation of the Gemara, but more useful in a more advanced class where maybe the students are actually figuring out the Gemara on their own. So I think that the question of how much Rashi to learn is an open question, and I would love to hear your comments about that. And lastly, I'd like to ask another question, which is that we spend a lot of this time talking about more basic skill building classes. I think we should also think about more advanced, older classes, let's say like the higher 11th or the higher 12th levels, where hopefully they have some of these skills. So what's the methodology in teaching these classes? How do we address them in particular? Which of the skills that we've discussed until now should be used in a higher level class, and which of them should not? I think it's always easier to teach a motivated and advanced older group of students, but it's a little bit lazy to just use the fact that they're motivated and advanced to make the teaching a little bit more sloppy, and hopefully the students will just figure it out on their own, but to be more purposeful of how to set those students up for building up their skills and conceptual understanding. So my two closing questions is really how to use Rashi in classes, and also how to prepare a classroom on a more advanced level class. Look forward to hearing your thoughts.